There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about a month ago that was titled "Bush and Lincoln" by Newt Gingrich. And in the article, he wrote about the dilemma facing Abraham Lincoln in 1862 during the Civil War, and pointed out that there were three factions at that time in the Union. There were those who believed that we should just let the South go and not bother about it, it doesn't matter. There were those who believed that, yes, the South must be defeated, but the Union has enough troops and enough resources to do it. Then there was a third faction. The third faction believed that this was the greatest crisis to ever face the United States. All of our resources, everything at our disposal, must be mobilized to win this conflict at all costs. President Lincoln chose the third course, and I think we all know the end result. But Mr. Gingrich drew an analogy with the present situation, not just in Iraq or Afghanistan, but the Middle East in general, that we have these three factions. Right now, the second faction that believes that we can handle it still has the upper hand. But of course, the first faction says it doesn't matter. Once the US pulls out, everything will be fine. But he points out that the third faction is the one that is right. The basic problem is that people do not even understand what we're up against. Because we look at Iraq and we look at Afghanistan as separate issues, localized conflicts. We fail to see the big picture. And the big picture is that over the course of the last 1400 years, there has been a repeated clash of civilizations between the Western world and the Islamic world. And we are now entering one of those periods again where there will be this major clash between the two. Let me show you what I mean here. I also have quite a few quotes here from different books that will give you some background on the nature of Islam. Now, please understand as we go through this, when I have all these quotes on about Islam, I could be giving a presentation on, Catholic Europe and showing some of the terrible things that were done by people who consider themselves Christians. But this is primarily about Islam and the Middle East. And we need to understand the nature of what we are up against when it comes to this general problem of resurgent Islam. Here's a quote from a book called Islamic Imperialism. Imperialism is where one nation or one force wants to impose its will on others. This book is by a man called Ephraim Karsh, who is the head of the Mediterranean Studies Department at London University. The 9/11 attacks have inspired two diametrically opposed interpretations regarding their root causes. Again, there's the book and the details of the book. According to the first school of thought, the attacks were the latest salvo in the millenarian clash of civilizations between the worlds of Islam and Christendom. This is one faction. Not so, argues a vast cohort of academics, journalists, writers, and retired diplomats. The attacks were a misguided, if not wholly inexplicable, response to America's arrogant and self-serving foreign policy by a fringe extremist group whose violent interpretation of Islam has little to do with the actual spirit and teachings of this religion. Now just take that in for a moment, because this is definitely the way that most of our academics and most people in our various media outlets think. They think this way, that the attacks were not typical of Islam, that most Muslims are peace-loving. They also feel that we deserved what we got on September the 11th because it was all due to America's meddling in the Middle East. So there are a lot of people who feel that if we pull out of the Middle East, then everything will be fine. We won't have any more problems. But this lecture will help you to see otherwise, because we're up against something much bigger than the localized problem in Iraq or the problem in Afghanistan. Here's a quote from the Prophet Muhammad in 632. "I was ordered to fight all men until they say, there is no God but Allah. Again, just think that through. I was ordered to fight all men until they all yield to Islam, the religion of Islam, which means submission. Islam means submission. And, this has been an expansionist religion ever since the beginning. Muhammad started receiving his visions in 610 AD. He died in 632. The religion really took off in the last 10 years of his life. And I'll show you with some maps just how rapidly it spread. So this was Muhammad's farewell address in 632 AD, almost 1400 years ago. Here's another quote, this time from Saladin. Saladin drove the Christian forces out of the Middle East during the Crusades. In January 1189, Saladin came from the same town of Tikrit that Saddam Hussein comes from. And you'll see in this the continuity in history. This is what Saladin said about the Christian forces. And by Christian I mean Catholic forces, because that's all there was at that time. I shall cross the sea to their islands to pursue them until there remains no one on the face of the earth who does not acknowledge Allah. Here's another one, more recent, from 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini. We will export our revolution throughout the world until the calls, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, are echoed all over the world. Recently, Amir Tahiri, who was the editor of Iran's biggest selling newspaper, and who eventually had to flee the country, was interviewed on the Wall Street Journal's editorial program on television on Fox News on a Saturday night. It's a program put together by the Wall Street Journal. And he was asked by the interviewer, the interviewer said, are we on the verge of World War III? He came right back with, World War III began in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution, because that was the first triumph of Islamic fundamentalism in our era. And Islamic fundamentalism has been spreading since 1979. And that is so true, and it keeps on spreading. The latest country to fall to the fundamentalists is Somalia. But now it looks also as if Iraq could fall to the fundamentalists. And Afghanistan also, although we were able to remove the Taliban from power after September the 11th, they now seem to be coming back in various regions of Afghanistan. Islamic fundamentalism is a force whose time seems to have come. And we see this force spreading gradually. And this was the Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. A revolution that established a theocracy. Here's one from somebody who's more familiar to you all, Osama bin Laden, 2 months after September the 11th. I was ordered to fight the people until they say there is no God but Allah and his prophet Muhammad. I might just mention here that Osama's followers see him as somewhat similar to Muhammad in this respect. Muhammad had a vision in which it was revealed to him that he would bring down the two greatest empires in the world, which at that time were the Persian and the Byzantine empires. And within a few years of his death, both of these empires were defeated, and eventually both fell to the forces of Islam. And Osama bin Laden's followers claim he had a similar dream in the 1980s, that he would defeat that he would bring down the two greatest powers in the world. Of course, the Soviet Union collapsed as a direct result of the efforts of the Taliban, which at that time included Osama bin Laden in the 1980s, against the Soviet Union. And of course the dream is to bring down the United States, and they believe that they can do that. They're absolutely convicted that God is on their side and they will be able to achieve that.